Hello YouTube. This video is about putting a steering column in our gasser. And I think the first thing we have to do is put the front drop in. And we're lucky that the steering column is reinforced all the way up to here. So I think the first drop is going to go right about here. I have a ruler clamped to the dash. The ruler is level. The top of the ruler is below the reinforcement for the old steering column. We'll draw a line across the top of the ruler. The holes are 2 5/8 inches apart, which means we have to be 1 5/16 on each side. 1 5/16 on each side is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right there. Perfect. And 1 5/16, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right there. Perfect. We'll take a punch and punch it there. Right there. Take an 1/8 inch bit. Take a 1/4 inch bit and drill that out. I started this project on the wrong foot. I drilled the holes in the wrong spot, the first set of holes. So we're going to weld them up. And we'll check to see if the drop still fits in the holes, and it does. We'll put some nuts on the back side. Get a 7/16 inch socket. With the steering column in place, we can see that what we really need is another 2-inch drop for the back. So I'm going to go order it right now. Our second steering drop has arrived. And the reason we need a second steering drop is that this is the Ididit Shorty Steering Column, which ends before you get to the firewall. So we have to have a secondary support at the back of the steering column in order for the steering column to stay in a position. Now that means we have to put the second drop in exactly the right spot for it to line up with the column. What I've done is I've cut off the heads of 2 1/4 inch bolts and sharpened them into points. And I'm going to run that along the bottom side of the dash to try to locate the holes. We'll take the steering drop and put it on the end of the column and drag it along the underside of the dash and see if we can make some lines where to drill the holes. Let's see what we got. If you look closely, you can see the line that we created with the points on the end of the bolts. With the steering column removed, we can crawl underneath here and draw a straight line across. We can then center punch where the lines cross. And drill some holes. Broke that bit right off. Son of a gun. Now that we have the broken off bit out of the hole, we can drill the holes out with a 1/4-inch drill bit and see if our second mount fits up into the holes, and it does. So we'll go get the right bolts and put our second mount in. We'll take the Ididit column drop with the Ididit studs in it and put them through the holes. Put some washers on it. Put the nuts on it. And tighten it down with a 7/16" socket. As I suspect that we'll be taking it back out for one reason or another, we won't tighten it all the way down. Now we can put the steering column back in. There's secondary drop. Take the first drop. Carefully screw it in so we don't cross thread it. Clock it so the hole for the tilt is at your 9 o'clock position and tighten it down. And we have our steering column mounted. Now, I'm not real happy with how solid it is. What we're going to have to do is put a brace in, and I think we'll run it from the bottom of the dash to the top of the dash, and that'll keep the steering column from wiggling like that. But it's pretty solid. We can certainly continue with the installation the way it is. The next thing we have to do is put a universal on the bottom of the column. And unfortunately we have to take the column back out to put a dimple in the steering column shaft so that our universal can't come off. This is the universal that's going to go on the bottom of the shaft in the steering column. I had to take a little emery paper to smooth that shaft out just a little bit because the universal wouldn't go on. And we're going to take the set screws out and slide the universal on. And what we want to do is slide it on until the shaft is just at the bottom of the universal. We don't want the shaft to protrude into the universal because it'll interfere with the movement of the universal. We want the shaft to be just at the bottom of the socket of the universal so it just shows. We'll support the shaft coming through the column so that we're not going to put any stress on the bushing in the column. And what we're going to do is put a center punch where that set screw is going to go into the column. Take an 1/8" bit and put a little starter hole. We're not going to drill all the way through, we're just going to put a dimple in it. Take a 1/4" bit and complete our dimple. And that's really all we need. We're going to do the same thing to our D shaft that's going to go through the floor. We'll slide it into the universal until it just appears. Take a punch. Punch it. Take our 1/8" drill bit. Give ourselves a little pilot hole. Quarter-inch bit. so that we have a dimple in it. Slide our universal back on the shaft. Line up our dimple. Put our set screw in. Take an Allen wrench and screw the set screw in so it's snug. And then take the nylock nut and lock that set screw in place. And what that'll do is keep the shaft from coming out of the universal. Now we won't put this in until we get it in the car. So now we got to put this back into the car. So in it goes again. We'll set it into the lower support. Push it up to the upper support. The double D shaft is going to have to come through the floor. This hole's not going to work because it won't line up with the steering gearbox, but it'll give us an idea of what it's going to look like. I'll put the set screw in so it doesn't fall out. This is where it ends up coming through that hole. It's at about the right height, but it's going to go that way in order to line up with the steering gearbox. And we're going to have to put another universal on the end of the steering gearbox. So now the challenge is finding the right spot without making a mess out of our firewall. But I think we can make an educated guess, and I think I have a way of trying it out without drilling too many holes. More and more I'm thinking that what I'm going to have to do is cut a hole about that size, mount the through dash bushing for the double D shaft, and then weld the patch back in. But either way, this thing has to be removed, and it's spot welded in place. So the first thing we're going to do is center punch the spot welds. Now we'll drill it out with an 1/8 inch drill bit. And now we'll take a spot weld drill bit, which is nothing more than a bit that's got a sharp point on it and a very shallow step on it, and it'll cut the spot weld and not much else. And now it should come off fairly easy. What we're trying to do is to put this through the wall bushing in place, and we know it's not going to go there because it doesn't meet the steering gearbox. We have to move it over that way. Because we have so many holes in the floor already, I think what I'm going to do is cut a big hole, locate this in the right spot, and then patch the hole. What I want to do is eliminate that hole, those holes, this hole, this depression, because it's hard to weld around, and move the shaft to the right. So I think our first cut line will be somewhere about here. Now we want to go across and get rid of those holes on the bottom. We want to get rid of the depression, so we got to be up here someplace. We don't want to get into this depression because we want a nice easy weld around the patch, and we know that the steering shaft has to go to the right, so we'll go right about here. And we'll cut that out. So here we go, cutting a big hole. Now the shaft will fit. We'll get rid of the sharp edges and the paint so we get a good weld. And that's about where it's going to go. It's going to go in the upper corner like that. Almost need to make the hole bigger, but I think we can make that work. The shaft has to come down to meet the output shaft on the steering gearbox, so we'll be just fine. We'll tape a piece of riverboard over the hole. And go to the outside and trace the outline of our hole. We'll cut our pattern out. We'll stay on the outside of the line because we traced the hole on the inside of the actual hole. We want the piece of metal to be actually a little bit larger. Wipe off our piece of metal because it is dirty. Lay our pattern out on it. Cut it out. And we'll test fit our patch, and it fits very nicely all the way around. We got a little bit of a gap, so we'll get good penetration, and we're ready to put the shaft through the patch. With our double D shaft coming through the hole in the floor and fastened to the steering column, and with the universal fastened to the top of the steering gearbox, we can mark the double D shaft where we have to cut it off at and go cut it. And clean up the end. With the steering column mounted where we want it on the dash, and the double D shaft fastened to the bottom of the steering column, and the double D shaft coming into the universal on the steering gearbox, we can see that the end of the double D shaft is right at the end of the hole for the universal on the steering gearbox. And we can put our center punch into the hole and dimple the double D shaft just like we did with the universal on the end of the steering column. The way you get the double D shaft into the universal on the top of the steering gearbox is you slide it into the steering gearbox, slide the steering column down over the D shaft. With the steering column locked in place and the double D shaft secured both on the column and the steering gearbox, we can go about the business of locating the hole for the shaft in the floor. We can take a ruler and slide it underneath the floorboard and up to the D shaft and measure the distance from the edge of the hole to the D shaft, and it's 7/32, and we can mark that on our piece. We can take the ruler and lay it on the bottom and measure that, and from the D shaft to the edge of the patch is 1 and 9/32, and mark that on our patch. Take the piece that we cut off the double D shaft and lay it in so that we had the flat to the bottom and the round to the side, which is what we measured, and outline that. And that's where our hole has to be. So using a judgment, the center of that hole is right there. And that's where we're going to drill our hole. The hole has to be big enough so that this swivel will fit through the hole, but not big enough so that it doesn't exceed the side of the bushing. So what we want is a hole that is about 1.150 inches. With a hole drilled in our patch slightly larger than the bushing that's in through the firewall bushing, we can go try it out and see if we got it in the right spot. Looks like we were pretty lucky. Our bushing fits right where we wanted it to. We have the patch held in by a magnet. The next step is to tack weld our patch in place and test it one more time. With our patch held in exactly the right spot with magnets, we'll put a tack on it to hold it in place. Make sure that we're up where we want to be. We want to be flush to the floor. Put another tack on it. Now we can take the magnets off and weld the thing in. This is what our patch looks like after it's fully welded in and ground down. We have to mark and drill holes to mount the bushing to the firewall, which means we got to take it back out again. Here we have the through the firewall bushing bolted in place, and with all the bolts and the set screws in place, it has really solidified the column, but I still want to put the brace in from the bottom of the dash to the top of the dash, and of course we've got to put the steering wheel on. To make our brace, what we'll do is we'll measure from the top of the dash to the bottom of the dash and get a measurement of 9 11/16. And we'll cut a piece of square tube that long. We'll mark off 9 11/16. And cut that off. Our piece of square tube fits nicely between the bottom of the dash and the top of the dash without deflecting the bottom of the dash, but it's just the right length to hold the two together. And what my idea is to put a nut in the bottom of this, weld a nut into the bottom of this, and go up through the bottom of the dash and weld the top of the tube to the dash. A 5/16 inch nut fits this way into the tube, but won't fit down into the tube, so we've got to knock off the points on the nut to make it fit. What I've done is double nutted it on a bolt so to hold it so that I can knock the points off. And there it fits. We'll take the nut on the end of a bolt and tap it into the tube and weld it in. Grind off the excess weld. So we have just the hole of the nut showing through the end of the square tube. Run a 5/16 inch tap down through the nut to clean out any splatter or burrs in the threads. Check to see if our bolt goes in, and it does. We'll drill a hole in the bottom of the dash for the bolt. Put our bolt up through the hole. Take and put the bar in place. Screw the bolt in. Tighten it up. Weld it in. And our brace is welded at the top and bolted in at the bottom. We can look at the top of the dash and know that we got good penetration. We'll take a little sandpaper and sand that off and paint it. You'll never know it was there. For the final install of the column, we'll take the tilt lever and screw it into the side of the column. They recommend putting Loctite on the threads. I'm not going to do that just yet because I may want to take this back out again. We insert the turn signal lever through the upper hole, and they provide a Phillips screw to go in to lock it into place. The emergency flasher button screws into the right side of the column. We rotate the column so that our tilt and turn signal are at the 9 o'clock position, and tighten the steering column down. Take the nut off the end of the steering column. Slide the steering wheel adapter onto the column and the cover on top of that. As the wheels are pointing pretty much straight forward, we'll put the red band at the top and thread our bolt in. I'm not going to worry about a horn button just yet because I don't have one. Put our through the firewall bolts in place. Put a pair of vice grips on it so we can tighten it from the other side. Put our nuts on the bolts coming through the firewall and tighten them up. Note that our wheels are pointed straight forward, and the ribbon at the top of the steering wheel is right at the top. We were lucky we didn't have to adjust that. With the driver's seat installed, and I'll put a link in the upper corner for the install of the seat, we find that we have a very comfortable driving position. The steering wheel is rock solid with a brace and a dash. We can adjust the steering wheel to any angle that we want. I'm looking straight out the front windshield. The next thing that'll come along will be the brake pedal and the gas pedal. If you enjoyed this video, there'll be more.